Hey, welcome to another video. So today we're going to be going into everything there is to know about the family of CROTA, the son of ORYX. But before we begin, please be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, join the Sith Citadel Discord, links in the description, and consider becoming a join member or sending a super thanks if you wish to further support the channel. Otherwise, let's jump straight into it. So, CROTA, son of ORYX, also known as the God Knight, or the Light Destroyer, and the Eater of Hope, was an ancient and powerful hive prince who wielded the sword of CROTA and killed countless guardians during the city's ill-fated campaign to reclaim the moon. CROTA is the main antagonist in the Dark Below, in which the hive seek to awaken him to lead their armies against humanity. After ORYX fought his way out of the deep, after being trapped within by his sisters Savathun and Xivu Arath, he decided that he needed children to carry on his lineage, and ensure his flow of tribute was always greater than that of his siblings. CROTA was then born, and his father explained to him why he had created him and granted him a sword and a name, stating those would be the only things that he gave his son, and that CROTA would have to earn his place upon his father's court, the High War. The newborn CROTA continued to listen as his father explained the trap of the traveler, and giving species hope that there was a path in the universe that did not involve conflict, and then gave CROTA the name the Eater of Hope, in anticipation of the lives and dreams he would snuff out. CROTA was then taken to be introduced to the rest of his family. CROTA was soon joined by two sisters, Ir-Halak and Ir-Anak, and a brother, Nokris. However, Nokris was excommunicated and stricken from the hive's histories for his heretical necromantic practices. CROTA himself was made heir to his father and the Osmium throne. CROTA also had four swarm princes, Bannock, Dakur, Garok, and Marok, forged for him a great sword with which to ravage worlds and drain the light from his foes. At some point, the young CROTA would petition his father to forge him from the flesh of the worms a tablet of ruin to bear in battle, and tithed as tribute to him. Instead, ORYX coldly rebuked his son by setting the newly created tablet with Golgoroth, and explained only tithings of violence from him and his temples were demanded of him. One day, CROTA was approached by ORYX in order to watch his sisters as they experimented with the creation of an oversoul, a paracausal thanatosphere meant to hide their deaths and become harder to kill in the hope that he would learn cunning. However, as ORYX departed to observe the destruction of an alien fortress whirled by the Black Fleet, CROTA conspired to learn his sister's secrets of the oversoul, with which he shared his father's war priests. His aunt Savathun would influence the arrogant young prince to experiment himself with opening a wound into an open space. The space CROTA's sword cut into would open a rift into the Vex network, prompting the Vex to invade ORYX's throne world en masse, much to Savathun's trickery. CROTA engaged the Vex in battle, as they struggled to understand logic of his father's throne world, but they then manifested Kira, Blade Transform, who grasped the logic and became determined to master the Ascendant realm. The Vex teleported away from CROTA and slaughtered thousands of hive throughout the dimension, granting them greater power. CROTA and his sisters fought the Vex and created new weapons to defeat them, but Kira fled to the other side of the wound created by CROTA and built gates to prevent him from closing it. After a century of stalemate, the war was ended when ORYX was summoned back by Ir. Although ORYX saved his throne world from the Vex and became intrigued by their fascination with geometry, he punished CROTA for his reckless experiment by exiling him from his court. Grabbing him by one of his legs, the taken king flung his progeny into the Vex gate network and ordered him to return home covered in glory or not at all. For centuries, CROTA traversed the Vex's gate network and fought across space and time, becoming a demon in many cultures. As time passed, he adjusted his tactics as he gained a greater understanding of his father and ceased to spare some of his victims, whom he complained about his father to, and instead built mighty temples and monuments to himself to increase his power through tribute, strengthening himself and his father. Meanwhile, his father would also raise Thalnok, the fanatic of CROTA, as a proxy to observe his absent son after he found favor in the latter's attempts to mantle him. Over time, during his imposed exile, CROTA himself would be joined in his symphatic consort, Omnigul, the Will of CROTA, a zealous wizard who became the mother of his own devoted brood. The two of them together would raise CROTA's own court of disciples, including Sardon, the Fist of CROTA, and the Death Singer, Ir-Yet. At one point, a then-nameless Lokar had attempted to murder Omnigul to fuel her own tith. CROTA gave chase to the fleeing wizard, only for her to have escaped his wrath, frustrating the exiled Hive Prince. He went before ORYX and demanded his father kill Lokar for her impudence. ORYX was instead amused and impressed by the wizard's ability to evade his son, and raised her to his court, rebuking CROTA for his simplicity. CROTA also created a mighty ogre for his own design as a means to challenge the wizard Kegor, the World Render, which Omnigul claimed as her own personal summon. Among his greatest of CROTA's spawn was Hashladun, the eldest of 4 daughters, along with her sisters Bezereth, Keenox, and Voshar. Even as a young thrall, she came to CROTA's attention, as she was able to contend with knights in strength and size. Intrigued by Hashladun, CROTA ordered her inundated in the old way of floods to remove her excesses and leave her distilled down to her most powerful form through purification. Hashladun fought the forces CROTA sent against her, slaying them all. But CROTA himself then came for her, even more deeply impressed by her love for him, expressed by her strong display of will in defying him. Dragging his daughter to a floodplain in the Ascendant realm, he impaled her to its base in the 6 places and began the ritual of inundation. Hashladun survived the ritual and emerged weakened by the ritual, but stronger for it. Murdering the first living thing she encountered to regain her strength, CROTA came before her proud and impressed, but in sorrow informed her that in her newfound greatness she could not love him, as most of what had been his in her had washed away, and left behind only what was of her grandfather ORYX. With a cry of joy and grief, he cut a hole in his realm and cast her out of his court to join the ranks of his fathers. At some point in the collapse, CROTA and his spawn came to the Sol System, in his everlasting pursuit of the Traveler, and to wipe the last bastion of humanity it had protected. CROTA would also leave the Hive in conquering Luna, which held the pyramid of the disciple Nezarec buried beneath the surface since the Traveler's final attack. His spawn hollowed out the planetoid into a war moon, where they laid dormant until they launched their own invasion of Earth during the early City Age. In addition to Luna and the former disciple's pyramid, CROTA became interested in the space station's cockatus, which contained experimental gates from the golden age of humanity. He established his hold over these gates and created a manifold into his throne realm. From there, CROTA and his brood could commune with whispers echoed through the cockatus gates, learning to create the first weapon of sorrow. The Guardians barely repelled the Hive offense at the Battle of the Burning Lake, not realizing the true threat that the Hive posed. They launched a counterattack on the moon, which was later called the Great Disaster. The sword logic proved to be too much for the Guardians, as countless heroes fell before CROTA's blades. The God Knight himself would emerge from the abyss as he cracked Luna's surface with every stroke of his sword, and took the light of every Guardian life that it fell. Gunvor the Dawncaller would rally the remaining Titans from the First Pillar Order in a desperate charge against CROTA, sacrificing themselves to the Eater of Hope in a futile bid for time. Soon he would face the legendary Titan Wei Ning, overwhelming the striker with the paracausal might of the sword logic as he impaled her upon his cleaver. As a further show of dominance over his foes and their light, CROTA took the life of a Guardian using their own ghost, whose shell was hammered into a knife. His leadership and the power of his sword led to the Hive hordes to victory during the battle, slaying thousands of Guardians and driving them away from the moon for more than a century out of fear of CROTA's power. Despite this great victory for the Hive, CROTA's plans for further conquest of humanity were put on hold due to his father calling him back to the Ascendant plane for their final victory together. Within the Sea of Screams, however, 2 knights, one of ORYX and one of Zevo-Arath, engaged in a duel of honor in their respective masters. The duel ended in a draw, but both flung themselves into the depths of an abyss, so the Knight of ORYX failed to make his tribute to a champion of CROTA. The setback cost CROTA's champion a significant tribute at the necessary time, and thus led to his defeat in a duel against the Sergeant of the God of War. Having suffered a major loss of temples and tributaries for his father, CROTA judged it best to sleep upon his throne world and recover his lost tiths while his soul remained tethered to the Ascendant Crystal, giving him a quick means to return to the real universe once his strength was restored. He would also entrust his own sword to the 4 Swarm Princes of the Hidden Swarm, to guard within the depths of the Hellmouth until his return to the physical world. Seeking revenge for the Great Disaster and the death of Wei Ning, Ariana III led 5 other guardians in an attempt to assassinate CROTA within his throne world, but the hordes of Hive dwelling within the Hellmouth managed to overwhelm the fire team, picking them off one by one. Only one of the guardians, Eris Morn, survived, forever changed by her harrowing experiences trapped in the Hellmouth and obsessed with ending CROTA before he awoke. Decades later, CROTA's court began preparing for his return to the physical realm by invading the Cosmodrome on Earth, with his consort Omnigul leading the effort to raise the Hive army for a full-scale invasion of the city upon his return. Having foreseen the imminent return of CROTA, Eris called upon the aid of a newly risen Guardian to aid her in dismantling CROTA's army. The Guardian successfully assassinated CROTA's closest lieutenants, including the Swarm Princes and their commander, Sardon. As CROTA's resurrection draws near, Eris guides the Guardian to the moon, where the chamber housing CROTA's soul was located. The Guardian arrives in the midst of the summoning ritual, and works to disrupt it and slay the ritualist wizards. The crystal tethering CROTA's soul in the Chamber of Night would be sent back to the Ascendant realm, banishing his shadowing presence from the physical world, and thereby preventing his corporeal return. Afterwards, CROTA's horde was thrown into further disarray when the Guardians killed Omnigul in a strike operation, which prevents any further attempt to fully revive him. CROTA's end would be met by the Guardian leading a newly formed raid team upon the Oversoul throne. Entering from the deepest pit of the Hellmouth, the Guardian summoned CROTA from his crystal to engage in his own throne world, surrounded by his army of Ascendant Hive. When conventional means failed before the Hope Eater, the Guardians turned CROTA's own sword logic against him with the cleavers of his broken blades, permanently killing him. CROTA's demise ultimately caught the attention of his father ORYX, the then God King of the Hive and Master of the Taken. Enraged by the death of his son, ORYX would bring his dreadnought into the solar system and lead an army of Hive and Taken in revenge against the Guardians. Ironically, CROTA's lingering ascendant power was necessary for the Guardians to access the Rupture Gateway into Oryx's sanctum. Returning to the Chamber of Night that tended to the crystal that housed CROTA's soul, the Guardians were able to gain a shard of the crystal, but it did not hold a piece of his soul. The Guardians now had to disrupt CROTA's death ceremony to gain a sliver of his soul. Entering CROTA's fortress, the Guardians narrowly slipped past the Hive defending his tomb, and were able to fill the shard with CROTA's death essence. With the Ascendant Shard, the Guardians were successfully able to enter Oryx's throne and defeat him. Like his son, ORYX would later fall to the Guardians who killed CROTA, when he was slain by them in his own throne world within the Ascendant Plane. CROTA's disowned, heretical, and forgotten brother Nokris would make his own stand against the Guardians, after arising from slumber in the icy depths of Mars' Hellas Basin with his master, the worm god Zal. The Herald of Zal sought to conquer the Red Planet for his god, but like his former family, Nokris would fall against the Warrior of Light. As CROTA was the first Hive god the Guardians ever faced and one of their most notorious foes, he haunts the Risen in their memories. Following the Scorn hunts and the continuous fight for the Dreaming City, CROTA's form would manifest as a nightmare blocking the Guardians' path to the derelict pyramid beneath the Scarlet Keep. The newly spawned nightmare of CROTA would prove too much for the Guardian to face, who took an essence from it before they were saved by Eris Morn. The Guardian would later face the CROTA nightmare again as they were coaxed into the interior of the pyramid, which they then succeeded in destroying. CROTA's immediate family would be survived by his daughters, Bezereth, Vosher, Keenox, and the eldest Hashladun. Atop the newly erected Scarlet Keep upon Luna in Sorrow's Harbor, the daughters laid plans for the Hive's future, and to achieve vengeance by creating a deathless champion under their control through heretical means. Hashladun and Bezereth would both be killed by Guardians, leaving Vosher and Keenox to complete their work while hiding out. Unfortunately for CROTA's line, both Vosher and Keenox, along with their own children, would be killed by Osiris, when Savathun lured the remnants of the Scarlet Court into one place to be destroyed in one fell swoop. The Witch Queen planned this in belief that the bloodline of ORYX had run its course. In his youth, CROTA was a great warrior, although extremely brash and arrogant. His father ORYX believed he lacked the cunning of his sisters, which led to CROTA being easily tricked by his aunt Savathun into opening a portal into the Vex realm. which taught the machines the sword logic and planted the seeds for the eventual taking of Kira, the blade transform. As the millennia wore on, CROTA gained more respect for his father and a greater understanding of the sword logic, increasing both their power through mighty temples of tribute. He exiled his brother Nokris and remarked that he had a taste for glory. By the time of the Great Disaster, CROTA had reached the pinnacle of his strength and could easily wipe out hundreds of light-empowered guardians, including Wei Ning, one of the last city's greatest champions. Omnigul, the Will of CROTA, was an ascendant hive wizard and the consort of the hive god CROTA. She was also the matron of the spawn of CROTA and the leader of his armies. She acted as the secondary antagonist of the Dark Below campaign, where she led the hive in resurrecting CROTA back to the material realm and raising an army to invade the city. Both efforts were thwarted as she finally met her end at the hands of a fire team of guardians. As the consort of the Hope Eater, Omnigul served as the brood mother of CROTA's spawn through their progenition. As the keeper of the brood's worms and his chosen will, though their conception, Omnigul is also the mother of 4 daughters of CROTA's direct lineage, Hashladun, Bezereth, Keenox, and Vosher. At one point, she was the target of a then unnamed wizard to feed her starving worm using her death as a tith, an act which instantly invokes CROTA's wrath, only for her to escape him and then reward by his father, who named her Lokar and elevated her to his court. According to Toland, Omnigul would be given command of the might of CROTA to be her bulwark, an ogre of CROTA's design deemed to be untamable by the likes of Kagor, World Renderer. During Ariana III's failed raid upon the Hellmouth, Omnigul was present when she encountered Ariana and the hunter Seimota at the World's Grave. Their light siphoned and losing her knives to the hand of CROTA, Sai engaged the hive matron armed with only the bones of the fallen acolytes. Omnigul tore the hunter apart 44 times until only worm rot was left on her corpse, to devour what remained of the latter's light and ghost. Several months after the destruction of the Black Heart, Omnigul was first sighted on Earth, leading a contingent of hive against the fallen House of Devils, before she met the Guardian during their hunt for Sardon, the Fist of CROTA. Fleeing the scene as they wiped both parties, Eris Morn confirms to Ikora Rey her departure from the Hellmouth for the first time in years, with word having reached Eris about an imminent plot to sabotage the Warmind Rasputin and his Warsat defenses at the Seraphim Vault within the Cosmodrome. During the hive siege of Rasputin's bunker, Eris sends the Guardian to stop their advance from either destroying or corrupting the Warmind. When they reach the center of the bunker, however, Omnigul and her Watchers of CROTA ambush them by summoning waves of hive reinforcements directly at the Guardian. When proven ineffective, Omnigul summons the might of CROTA before escaping yet again. While it seems that the assault to destroy Rasputin has failed, Eris believed that Omnigul has found what she sought from the Warmind. Ultimately, Omnigul's efforts at bringing back CROTA would be for naught, as her summoning ritual was disrupted and her spawn hunted by the Guardians, until she herself was left pursued by a strike fire team in an attempt to raise a new army beneath Skywatch. Despite her efforts at stirring the House of Kings against the Guardians, she was finally cornered at the Jovian complex and then killed, putting an end to her schemes. Shortly after the Siva crisis, Omnigul would make a brief return to Skywatch after having undone her death to continue her work, only to be swiftly killed again by the Guardian and their fire team. Since Omnigul was capable of evading permanent death, Ikora remarked that the Vanguard would likely continue to face Omnigul as many times as it would take, following the discovery of the pyramid beneath Luna's surface. The hive under Hashladun, a daughter of Omnigul and CROTA, used its strange energies to create phantasm-like nightmares. Constructing the eerie Scarlet Keep fortress near the pyramid, Hashladun aimed to use the pyramid's power to enact her revenge against the Guardians for destroying her lineage. However, like her mother and father before her, Hashladun would be defeated by the Guardians at the Scarlet Keep's highest tower. Despite Hashladun's death, nightmares continued to appear across the system, with the stronger ones forming into some of the Guardians' deadliest foes. Omnigul was among them, the newly formed Nightmare of Omnigul, the Will of CROTA, representing the essence of anguish, would become a target in the Guardians' nightmare hunts to contain the pyramid's influences. Hashladun, the daughter of CROTA, is an ascendant hive wizard and the eldest of the daughters, along with Bezereth, Vosher, and Keenox, of the hive god CROTA, son of ORYX, and Omnigul, the Will of CROTA. as well as granddaughter of ORYX, the Taken King. She is the leader of the Hidden Swarm and architect of the Scarlet Keep, harnessing the nightmares of the pyramid that lies beneath for her schemes and vengeance against the Guardians. Hashladun would meet her end by the Guardian at the top of the Tower of Woe, as part of her revenge against them, only to be killed by their fire team. Hashladun began as an abnormally large and strong thrall, huge of crest and thick of arm. Viewing this as excessive, her father CROTA ordered her ritually mutilated in the old way of floods, in order to reduce her to a normal size and strength, and sent 100 thrall, 10 knights, and an ogre to retrieve her. Hashladun fought off the entire force, but was left exhausted. After that, CROTA himself came for her, impressed but unrelenting, and took her to a floodplain deep within the ascendant plane, where she was impaled and exposed to the paracausal tides of the Sea of Screams, flooding her body 5 times with caustic and harmful substances. After the 5 inundations, Hashladun broke free from her impalement, starving, wounded, and much reduced in form. On witnessing her crawling back to his throne world, CROTA stated, "You are great now, and you cannot love me, for the parts of you that were mine have been taken from you. The parts that were his remain." With all ties to CROTA severed by the floods, and therefore rendered closer to ORYX, Hashladun had ascended into her grandfather's court, much to her father's joy and grief, knowing that she can never set foot in his court again. She was then sent forth to ORYX's side by her father, who cut a rift through space-time to an unknown destination. It is largely unknown what role Hashladun played in her grandfather's court, but she was presumed dead by the Guardians since CROTA's fall. Following the Taken War, Hashladun hid between the lunar surface alongside her sisters Bezereth, Kinox, and Vosher, and plotted their revenge against the Guardians for the deaths of her immediate family. Unable to accept a world without their king, Hashladun and her sisters enacted a plot to recreate their deceased grandfather in the form of a phantasmal nightmare, a necessary violation of the sword logic, since the Taken King was never succeeded by his killers. They also believed that ORYX might yet be truly resurrected, having been defeated before and returning to life through sheer will and tribute in his name. As the Coven of Sisters worked to enact their sinister plot, they were still left to deal with conspirators and contenders for the vacancy of a champion left by their late father. Many of the Hive that still held to the old beliefs in the sword logic gave way to gladiatorial combat in the pit beneath the keep, though none of the sisters believed any were worthy of their father or grandfather's succession. Hashladun and her sisters attended the pit to witness the gladiatorial games, and silenced Bezereth and Vosher as they expressed doubts about the fighters when the games began. Of the greatest contenders was the knight Zulmak, whose triumphs in the pit threatened to upend Hashladun's plans if anointed the new Hive champion by the majority of the swarm. Hashladun judged Zulmak a great warrior, but lacking the cunning of CROTA and ORYX, and turned to leave the pit alongside her sisters, which prompted much of the congregation to do the same. They were forced to return for a third fight, as Zulmak's performance had persuaded many that his strength as a warrior made him a worthy successor under the sword logic. This belief disgusted Hashladun, who noted that Zulmak's opponents were not impressive, as most of the Hidden Swarm's greatest warriors had been slain by Guardians already. However, Zulmak's reign was cut short by the Death Singer Azavath, whose body had merged with the essence of her knight brother, Akrazul, and went on a blind massacre with a royal congregation. Taking advantage of the ensuing chaos, Hashladun and her sisters assassinated their perceived enemies, leaving the Akrazul-possessed Azavath to take the blame, and none left to challenge them. As the Coven of Sisters made ready to leave, Hashladun glanced once more into the pit, and was greeted by the whispers of a fellow schemer, their great-aunt Savathun. She encouraged her nieces to seize control of the Hidden Swarms themselves, and be the strength the Hive needed to challenge the light with the mighty new fortress. Additionally, she offered a boon in the essence of the fallen Zulmak, to be raised as a puppet champion for the Swarm. Intrigued but wary of her aunt's schemes, Hashladun questioned what role the heretic Azavath reborn Iraram Deathsinger would play. As they killed their maddened brother Azakrul with the Death Song, Savathun offered her a second boon as the head of the reformed choir, a legendary group of Death Singers, to be used as another weapon in their upcoming battle against the Guardians. With their control over the Hidden Swarm secured, The daughters of CROTA rallied the remaining hive on the moon and began construction of the Scarlet Keep, acting as an amplifier of their magics, and award themselves of the pyramid's influences with the forbidden cryptoglyph. While the hive were unable to conjure nightmares, they instead bade their time for one behind ORYX's killers to be their catalyst, manipulated of her curiosity by the Witch Queen herself. After Eris Morn's discovery of the pyramid unleashed its phantasmal power, Hashladun utilized the Great Tower of the Scarlet Keep to channel its energy for their experiments, which helped the hive summon nightmares of great power near the keep, based on the fears and fast foes of the Guardians, including one of her late father. Using the cryptoglyph, Hashladun experimented with the creations of the ancient pyramid and found no hope of truly restoring ORYX and CROTA through their power, as their essences had truly disappeared. However, she and her sisters embraced Savathun's gifts and began crafting what remained of Zulmak into a fearsome champion of their own design and under their control. Through her experiments, Hashladun distilled the primordial essence of terror and contributed it to Bezereth and Vosher's reshaping of Zulmak's husk. When the Guardians invaded the moon to challenge the hive's resurgence and the appearance of the nightmares, Hashladun personally encountered the Guardian who slew her father, mother, and grandfather at the bridge to the keep. Retreating to the top of the spire, Hashladun lures the Guardian and their fire team to her position to finally claim her revenge for her ravaged lineage. Having gathered potent energies to amplify her powers, the inundated summons waves of hive reinforcements to swarm her enemies and use her magic in several attempts to knock them off the tower. In her quest for vengeance, however, Hashladun met her demise in flames, much like her family. From her remains, the Guardians found a tablet containing evidence of the cryptoglyph hidden at the bottom of the Hellmouth. So, Bezereth, the daughter of CROTA, is a child of the Hive Prince CROTA seen in the Deep mission, where she and some scholars attempted to protect the cryptoglyph from the Guardian, attempting to protect the key Hive artifact, preserving it within the catacombs, and helped to perpetuate her sister's plan. She personally attacked the Guardian to keep the cryptoglyph from falling into their hands, resulting in her inevitable demise. Along with her sisters Hashladun, Kinox, and Vosher, Bezereth retained her faith in ORYX even after his death, believing it to be the only way to save the Hidden Swarm, as no successor to ORYX had emerged. They forged a plan to resurrect him in the form of a nightmare. Moreover, knowing ORYX's immense power of will and vast tribute, they believed their king could yet come back as he had in the past. While the sisters plotted, various Hive champions fought in the pit for the vacant osmium throne, most notably Zulmak, whose victory could threaten their plans before they had a chance to truly unravel. The sisters didn't believe any of the gladiators were worthy of their grandfather's legacy, and observed the battles with disgust. Zulmak kept winning every fight, gaining the title of the Unwavering, until he was challenged by an unlikely adversary, the Death Singer Azavath, her body actually a shell for her brother Cruel's essence. Upon defeating Zulmak, Azavath, now Akrazul, began slaughtering members of the court watching the pit fights. The royal sisters made to escape, but Bezereth halted them and asked them to consider the moment of chaos as a perfect opportunity to eliminate the opponents to their rule. All four drew daggers from their cloaks and turned against those court's members they deemed a threat, then promptly left with the surviving remains of the congregation. Bezereth was later tasked with protecting the cryptoglyph deep within the catacombs. She fell to the Guardian, and the artifact was stolen in order to allow Eris Morn to forge equipment protecting the Guardian from the nightmares. Vosher was one of the daughters of CROTA, the son of ORYX. Together with her sisters Hashladun, Bezereth, and Kinox, they were collectively leading the Hidden Swarm on the moon. She was also the mother of the wizards Yashara and Arax. She met her end by the hand of Osiris. Vosher and her sisters Hashladun, Bezereth, and Kinox took leadership of the Hidden Swarm on the moon after their grandfather's passing during the Taken War. What they lacked in brute strength of the sword logic, they made up for in cunning, thought, and grand design. They considered themselves the shadowed architects of empires. They build their legacy upon the trade of secrets, the gossip of ages, and the sowing of lies. Words their weapons, cutting as any blade. Rather than adhere to the tenets of the sword logic, Vosher and her sisters schemed to preserve the glory of their forebearers, including ORYX and CROTA. Sometime before the events of Shadowkeep, the daughters of CROTA saw opportunity in an ancient pyramid buried beneath the surface, which they could possibly conjure the essences of CROTA and ORYX. However, as they speculate, they were also attentive to the pit, where Hive fought in gladiatorial combat for claim to their father's vacant throne, to which they must judge those worthy. Vosher expressed her doubts in the Hive after Bezereth only silenced by Hashladun's narrowing glare. However, with the sudden appearance of the Death Singer Azavath, killing the reigning champion Zulmak caused a panic among the royal congregation. The daughters took the chance to assassinate their enemies. With no one threatening their schemes, the daughters were free to enact their plan and had the swarm raise the Scarlet Keep. With the nightmares unleashed at the hands of Eris Morn, Keenox and her sisters could experiment with the phantasmal creations of the pyramid. However, they found that they could not raise their father nor grandfather, as their essences had truly dissipated, and that the nightmares were not alive. Instead, Keenox urged her sisters to act, seeing the potential in raising Zulmak as a warrior bound to their victims. Vosher and Bezereth would gather Zulmak's husk, while Hashladun offered the nightmare essence of terror to them. However, Hashladun and Bezereth would both meet their ends by the Guardians, leaving Vosher and Keenox to continue their work and abandon the sword logic for the sake of survival. The two would enact their forbidden ritual to empower the abominable Zulmak with the power of the nightmares, all while hiding out in fear of the Guardians. A year after the events of Shadowkeep, Vosher and her sister Keenox were met with the High Celebrant, a champion of their great aunt Zevor, the god of war, having entered the system to build an army of Wrathborn, and to rally the scattered Hive broods into her service. Having gathered with their own spawn beneath the enduring abyss to commune with the war god, they were immediately confronted by the warlock Osiris, who incinerated Vosher and her daughters Yashura and Arax with his daybreak. Keenox was one of the surviving daughters of CROTA, the son of ORYX, along with her sisters Hashladun, Bezereth, and Vosher, collectively leading the hidden swarm on the moon. She was also the mother of Ulgarin, a knight in command of her guard. She would be killed at the hands of the exiled warlock Osiris. Keenox and her sisters Hashladun, Bezereth, and Vosher took control of the hidden swarm after their grandfather's passing during the Taken War. What they lacked in brute strength of the sword logic, they made up for in cunning, thought, and grand design. They consider themselves the shadowed architects of empires. They build their legacy upon the trade of secrets, the gossip of ages, and the sowing of lies. Words are their weapons, cutting as any blade. Rather than adhere to the tenets of the sword logic, Keenox and her sisters schemed to preserve the glory of their forebears, including ORYX and CROTA. Sometime before the events of Shadowkeep, the daughters of CROTA saw an opportunity in the ancient pyramid buried beneath the surface, which they could possibly conjure the essences of CROTA and ORYX. However, as they speculate, they were also attentive to the pit, where Hive fought in gladiatorial combat for claim for their father's vacant throne, which they must judge those worthy. Keenox remained silent, contemplating their station and the depths from which they must descend if the swarm is ever to reclaim its own destiny. However, with the sudden appearance of the Death Singer Azavath, killing the reigning champion Zulmak caused a panic among the royal congregation. The daughters took the chance to assassinate their enemies. With no one threatening their schemes, the daughters were free to enact their plan and had the swarm raise the Scarlet Keep. With the nightmares unleashed at the hands of Eris Morn, Keenox and her sisters could experiment with the phantasmal creations of the pyramid. However, they found that they could not raise their father nor grandfather, as their essences had truly dissipated, and that the nightmares were not alive. Instead, Keenox urged her sisters to act, seeing the potential in raising Zulmak as a warrior bound to their whims. However, Hashladun and Bezereth would meet their ends by Guardians, leaving Keenox to act free without fear of heresy. She and Vosher would enact their forbidden ritual to empower the abominable Zulmak with the power of the nightmares, all while hiding out in fear of the Guardians. A year after the events of Shadowkeep, Keenox and her sister Vosher were met with the High Celebrant, a champion of their great aunt Zevor, the god of war, having entered the system to build an army of Wrathborn, and to rally the scattered Hive broods into her sway. Having gathered with their spawn beneath the enduring abyss to commune with the war god, they were immediately confronted by the warlock Osiris. Keenox would die attempting to flee from the ensuing battle, along with her son Ulgarin, who perished in a vain attempt to protect her from a nova bomb. So what did you guys think of the entire family of CROTA, the son of ORYX? Please let me know in the comments down below. If you haven't already, please be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, join the Sith Citadel Discord, links in the description, and consider becoming a join member or sending a super thanks if you wish to further support the channel. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.